All right, good afternoon and welcome back. Thanks for being here at the Bradenton Kiwanis Club today. All right, with today's program, I'd like to invite Steve Litschauer to come up and introduce our guest.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today. It's Sherilyn Burris. She's with Manatee County Emergency Management. She's been the Chief of Emergency Management since 2016. She has 13 years experience in emergency management, including a time with the Florida Department of Emergency Management. She's been the incident commander for Hurricane Ike, the earthquake in Haiti. She's worked with Hurricane Dennis, Katrina, Wilma. She worked with during one of the NASA launches. She holds 2 different master's degrees, and most important, she's my boss. So that's the biggest thing. That's all I needed to tell y'all. But she's going to come up today, and I'm going to add a little more to the program when she gets done. But with coming out of this weekend, I'm sure you want to get some good information, and coming out of Hurricane Irma last year, we'll touch on a lot of good information and field questions. On everyone's table is one of these hurricane guides. Please take one home with you. If you're part of a business, homeowners association, whatever, and you want these by the hundreds for your employees or your neighbors or your residents, please come up and see me and we'll make arrangements. This is a great guide. It's a soup to nuts of what to do, what you need, numbers to call, evacuation levels, and all that. So please take one. If you need more, let me know. And now my boss, Chief Sherilyn Burris.
So his performance evaluation is not coming up, but I appreciate that. So I spoke to you guys last year. I came out and talked to you about hurricane hazards and the way that we communicate hazards to people. I'm not a meteorologist, but I'm kind of like an interpreter for all of the things they say from the National Hurricane Center, what it actually means to us in Manatee County. And even though I try to go talk to as many people as I can, there's one of me, there's 5 people in our office, and there's 375,000 of everyone else. So sometimes our job is really never done. And so I'm going to continue on things that we think we know about hurricanes for our community, and then of course what we're going to do to improve. How many folks were here for Hurricane Irma last year? Hey, everybody, great. Okay, so you're experts. A lot of what I do is not probably what most people consider a day job. And while we do sit at a desk and write plans and make relationships and boost our community organizations locally, disasters happen in kind of a context. And there's a lot of research and people talking about disasters globally and locally. Try not to use the word natural disaster, because the hurricane doesn't put people in danger, people put people in danger. And disasters happen when we combine those dangerous natural hazards with people. So if a hurricane just made landfall somewhere where nobody lived, it probably wouldn't be a disaster. So we try to talk about disasters in the context of how we live our lives, where we live, things we do on a normal basis, and then things that kind of spur us to make decisions in disasters. One of the biggest things that studies show on why people make the choices they do during disasters is previous experience. And since you all went through Irma, how many people would make the same decisions next time? Not as many hands went up. Okay, so I'm going to talk a couple of points on kind of why we made those decisions. So 2016 was a very neat year. It was the first time that we had more hurricanes in Florida in 10 years, and that's a long time. That's a whole new generation of people. That's millions more people in the state of Florida than we had during that 2004 and 2005 season. And I started to learn when I asked people what they think about hurricanes or what they do to respond or prepare, the way people think about storms. So Tropical Storm Cindy was a very neat thing last year, and what happened in a nutshell is you can see the picture to the left. It's the forecast track. It's that skinny black line that the people on TV tell you where the storm is going. And the really neat thing about this storm was, yeah, the winds were headed west, but all of the rain was heading our direction. And that really caught people by surprise, because when they think about hurricanes, they think, oh, if I'm in the eye or the landfall, that's the most dangerous area. But it's really not. Hurricanes aren't that, discrete shape where there's a boundary and it only impacts on that boundary. We saw this with our storm over the weekend. Regardless of where the track was, those winds and that heavy rain can extend very far to one side or the other. Storms are very rarely like if you had a little kid draw what a hurricane looked like, they don't normally look like that. They're all over the place. They're very messy. And we saw that this weekend, of course, with Alberto. So after Cindy, funny enough, we had what we call a pop-up storm, and this one also caught people by surprise. So I was checking my email, getting ready in the morning, and I see, there's a tropical depression, or there's a low, and it might turn into a storm. And by the time I got to work, it was already a named storm. It was Emily, and it was making landfall right when everybody was getting to work on, I want to say it was a Monday morning, which is like epitome of a Monday morning. And if you guys work downtown, especially if you worked in the county administration building, come to find out, everybody was just at the window watching the storm go by. I'm like, no, don't do that. But a lot of folks thought that this couldn't happen. That whole, you have 5 whole days to prepare, or 3 whole days or a week to prepare, isn't actually true. Hurricanes can form even once the storm goes over land. So you shouldn't be surprised if by the time you check your email at home and then get to the office, things have changed. Well, one good thing about Emily was wrapped up by noon, and by the time everyone got off work at 5 o'clock, it was already done. Unfortunately, Hurricane Hermine was not, and that was a different scenario. When this storm passed us by, it was just a tropical storm. And I hate those words, just a tropical storm, because people associate tropical storm with less risk. And that's not entirely true. As it kind of passed out to our west, and very far to our west, that was that lopsided storm. All that rain on the other side of it. And of course, that ended up being a lot of localized flooding for us. Localized flooding, heavy rain, high tide, water doesn't go down. So in Florida, we're very flat. You guys have seen the city in Maryland over the weekend, and that flooding, that flash flooding, that really fast moving water because it's moving downhill. We don't have hills in Florida, so that water doesn't move very fast, but it does mean that it just stands there for days. That's what we saw during Hermine. We had Hurricane Matthew, and thankfully this wasn't a large impact here, but because it was a major storm on the other side of the coast, even though it didn't make landfall in Florida, people were scared because they hadn't been through a storm in quite a number of years. That meant everybody on the East Coast came over here, and we did what's called host sheltering, meaning they had to get out of the way. They didn't have sufficient space over there, so they came over here and we helped shelter their folks here. Manatee County is very big, and when we make decisions, it has to include the whole county. So for us in Manatee County, we were at risk, our far eastern parts over there, of getting high winds. So when we make decisions on whether or not we're going to have an emergency situation here, we have to include the fact that 20 miles, 30 miles away, we still have our folks living, and they were at risk for some wind. That was a fun year. Oh, Hurricane Harvey. So I was watching this make landfall on a Friday night, very late, because that seems to be when hurricanes make landfall. And this was a very scary scenario. In Florida, think of this like Hurricane Andrew. So it happened very fast. It accelerated very fast once it got close to their coast, and it increased. It went from a tropical storm to a 1, 2, 3, and then just slammed them as a 4. And it ramped up very quickly. If you watch the replays of this storm, I mean, it was terrifying to watch. And knowing that Texas has a coastline kind of similar to ours, very low, barrier islands, shallow bathymetry, so there's really nowhere for that storm surge to go but onto the land. And being a very strong Category 4, We hadn't have a major storm that's a Category 3 or higher since 2005. And just like Texas or just like Florida, they had a whole new generation of people that didn't really go through that. What they did go through in 2008 was Hurricane Ike, and it was a huge storm, so like the size of Irma, the entire size of Texas, but it wasn't a major storm. It had 20 plus feet of storm surge, that's the salt water that gets pushed in, so they were a little used to it. But what you get used to in the past is really maybe not what that future storm is going to hold, and Harvey was kind of the surprise for them. So where it made landfall on the coast as a 4 had a lot of wind damage. They didn't have as much storm surge, that salt water, but they did have 60 inches of freshwater rain coming out of the sky, not the surge off the Gulf of Mexico. And those are those images that we saw on TV. 60 inches of rain in a large city with a lot of concrete and nowhere for that water to go ends up being very similar to Florida. When we have flooding here, we're flat, there's nowhere for the water to drain downhill. And so in Texas, this is what we're seeing on TV. So this is what people in Florida who have not been through a storm are watching. We're watching people get rescued out of their house. We're watching entire cities underwater. But what we're not doing as the public is making the connection between rainfall and being rescued with 60 inches of rain. They're just hearing, this is a hurricane, this is what happens during a hurricane. If you had a hurricane, this is what it's going to look like. I remember Hurricane Harvey didn't make landfall in Houston. It just kind of sat on top of them with all of that rainfall. So they didn't get the wind and they didn't get the storm surge, they only got the rain. Last year I talked to you guys about the different aspects of what makes a hurricane dangerous. And 60 inches of rainfall can happen on a really bad day in Florida with no hurricane. And that's kind of what we saw the day after Hurricane Harvey. We didn't get 60 inches of rain. We got about 13 inches of rain. Some areas got a little more than that. Some areas got a lot more than that. Now, this rainfall in August here locally was not named. It didn't have what I call getting on a first name basis with a disaster. It was just rain in Florida at high tide, and there's nowhere for that water to go. So low-lying neighborhoods that had the majority of the rainfall, we experienced this flooding. So we just saw Harvey on TV. We just had to rescue our own neighbors. This is what we're thinking as we're looking at making choices for the future. So our experience with disasters is changing. It's changing based on what we're seeing in Texas from other people, and then it's changing based on what our local media is showing us. So Hurricane Irma kind of started for us Labor Day weekend. And when we started watching this storm, of course, we were very interested because it was so strong, so fast, and maintained its strength for a very long time. It's not as common. It's not super, super unusual, but it was a record breaker. And of course, anything that hits a Category 5 is automatically a very scary day. It wasn't a surprise to us that the storm originally looked like it was going to hit the other side of Florida. And of course, those evacuees from that side of the coast started making their way to ours, which was fine for a couple days. And then that storm started to shift track. So the picture on the right is Saturday, about 11 o'clock, and that's when that track finally said, you know what, hey, Manatee County, we're coming at you. And those were some scary, scary moments because we're looking at a major landfall of a storm here. There were a lot of other things going on with Irma, though, and don't focus on just where that little track is. The size of Irma, if you guys remember Hurricane Ike, the size of this storm was huge. It's bigger than the entire state of Florida. So that meant no matter where you were in the state, you were in some danger of receiving some form of hazard, either wind or water. That meant everybody needed to leave or go find safety or gasoline all at one time. There's what, like 20 million people in the state of Florida, so that meant every single person was out buying gas and water. How many people already had enough supplies on Labor Day weekend before everything kind of went off the rails? I don't see very many hands. Okay. You're going to probably change your decision for next time, I would imagine. I don't normally get to leave the office when we start to have what we call emergency operations. But I left my office for this one just to go home and kind of say goodbye to my apartment because I didn't know if it was going to be there. Funny enough, I was also part of that August flooding, and so I had already had that panic, it's raining, there goes my home and everything I know. And I went to Walmart, and it's pretty late one evening, and I'm walking down the aisles, and it was a surreal experience for me because, first of all, I don't get to get out and see it very often. And there was no food. There was maybe the stuff that people didn't really want to eat, but I mean, Spam, soup, Gatorade, you name it, gone, just row after row. The entire cereal box aisle, gone. Things I never thought would be gone were gone, and that was probably Thursday night. So the storm didn't even make landfall until Monday. You think of how many days in advance that was. So me and all the other 20 million of us were all out getting the supplies at the last minute, doing exactly what we tell you not to do, so don't wait. I love talking to people about what they experience during storms and then what they think should have experienced or what they think my job is. So I do this expectations versus reality. And you've seen some of these on the internet where they say oh, if I'm a microbiologist, what you think my job is, what my actual job is. What people thought when they thought of hurricane evacuation should have been the picture on the right. And that's bumper to bumper, going nowhere, you and 6 million other people all trying to leave at the same time. It is never going to be the picture on the right unless you leave well in advance. I can't fix the picture on the right. We have 20 million people and 2 roads out of our state. So we're on a humongous peninsula in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, sandwiched by the Atlantic, and there's really only 2 roads to get out, and I can't change that. But if you do ever want to leave for a storm and you feel like you really have to drive all the way to Tennessee, just make sure that you do it absolutely early, and you might experience that picture on the left. The other thing was gasoline. During hurricane season, and really pretty much any time year-round, because we get all of our fuel by boat, and there's sometimes that a storm doesn't have to impact us to have a shortage on fuel, make sure that your gas tank in your car never gets below half a tank. So this is what I tell everybody I know. As soon as I see something brewing in the Gulf, I call my parents and tell them to go get gas. This is something that you should also think about doing, considering hurricane season happens half of the year, and like Alberto, we don't even have to be in hurricane season to have severe weather. So make sure you have gasoline, because there's going to be a chance that picture on the right means that we don't have any gas. In 2004 and 2005, I remember waiting in line for gas, and I remember my parents talking about having to do that in the 70s when we were being rationed, and it was a neat but horrible feeling to know the person in front of you might get that last gallon of gas, and then kind of, what do you do? And it puts you on edge a little bit. If it makes you make a better decision next time, please make sure you have gas in advance. How many people didn't get to go get gas? Nice, I'm seeing fewer hands. The other thing we saw from Hurricane Harvey was a very huge increase in public sheltering demand. We set up hurricane evacuation centers or public shelters in our schools. So think about going to school, 5th grade, 7th grade, 9th grade, what have you. These are the facilities that we use because normally they're very big and normally they're built to a stronger code. So we can use them while the students are not there. But what people see on TV or in movies of what a hurricane shelter looks like and what it actually looks like is extremely different. So think of a hurricane evacuation shelter as something that can save your life. Craig Fugate, my first boss in emergency management, the director for the Florida Division of Emergency Management, went on to work at FEMA and has been back consulting because he can't get away. And he talks about hurricane shelters being a lifeboat, not a pleasure cruise. And we say that, and we say that, and we say that, and still we had hundreds of people going to hurricane evacuation centers, surprised that there were no cots, there's privacy, they get a very, very small amount of room. It's like camping in hell. It's really not a good time. It will keep you alive, but by no means is it going to be a pleasant, fun experience. And people really thought what they saw on TV or these disaster movies, that's how it's going to be. I'm like, no, you don't want to have to go to a hurricane evacuation center. Again, it will save your life, but it's not something I would ever say for my friends or family. By all means, go anywhere else that's safe. So this is the picture on the left that people think it's going to look like. It's going to be nice, and it looks very bright and airy, and there's cots and blankets, and somebody's even got an extension cord plugged in. It looks like a TV on the chair. So no, there's none of that. Their picture on the right is people sleeping on the floor. There's an air mattress behind them of some other people that, brought that with them. But whatever you bring with you is what you have in that shelter. So a couple of blankets and sleeping on the floor is probably not the place most of you guys are going to want to go. How many people went to one of these places? Yes? No? Good? No. We tell people to evacuate tens of miles, not hundreds of miles, because we don't want to put more people on the road than the road was ever designed to handle. And also because the longer you're on the road, the fewer supplies that are available. And it's not really based on mileage. It's just if you can go 10 miles, you only use 10 miles of gas. If you go 1,000 miles, you need more gas. So only evacuate out of the place that's being evacuated. And while that sounds like common sense and a little dumb to say out loud, people drove all the way to Texas, or they drove all the way to Virginia, or they drove super far away to get out of the way of the storm. What they didn't realize is, like Hurricane Charlie, people are laughing because I think they might have done that. Did it follow you? Hurricane Charlie was the example of a couple of our leadership team in 2004. We're like, oh, Hurricane Charlie is heading our way. We're going to go to Orlando. And I'm like, no, right? No matter where you go in Florida, with a storm that size, you're not getting out of the way. You can go inland to get away from the storm surge. Unless you really, like North Dakota or somewhere that doesn't have hurricanes, and I think even then they have some flooding going on right now, you cannot get out of the way. You're always going to be somewhere in some sort of danger. So stay as close as possible, then use as few supplies as you need to. If you wait until the government makes you leave, it is probably too late for you to go anywhere else. By all means, if you don't want to go camping with 500 people and no shower, go stay with friends and family outside of the evacuation area. If you don't live in the area being evacuated and you don't live in a mobile home or a manufactured home, it's probably safer for you to just stay home. This is what we call sheltering in place. So you don't have to go to a hurricane evacuation shelter to be in a shelter. Your home can be your shelter. If it's a recently built home, say after Hurricane Andrew, and it's not a mobile home, if it's outside of the area being evacuated and you have everything you need to stay safe, that's, do you put up your hurricane shutters? Do you have impact doors or windows? Is your garage door reinforced? Those sorts of things. If it's safe for you to stay home, by all means, it's probably going to be more enjoyable to stay home. And while that sounds pretty awful to say you're going to be having more fun at home, go back to the other picture of what it looks like to be in a hurricane shelter with 1,500 people for 3 days and no shower. The supplies, everything that you need is going to be listed in those hurricane planning guides on your table. There's some other things, honestly, that aren't listed that you don't really think about. It's how are you going to go to the bathroom or take a shower if you don't have running water? Are you going to be able to function without doing laundry for 10 days? So not everything is glory, pretty and sexy. Some of this stuff is actually pretty gross, and you have to think about it in order to be self-sufficient after a storm. Keep in mind, when I went into work on Thursday or Friday before Hurricane Irma, so days before, I love coffee, so I was like, well, I'll just go through Starbucks on the way back. And Starbucks was closed because they wanted to make sure that their employees could go make sure that they had everything to do to take care of their storm. So think of that when you make your plans and you need supplies. Know in advance that those stores are probably going to close well before those winds arrive because they have to take care of their employees as well. Also, the government doesn't give out free supplies unless there are no stores left. And since 2004 and 2005 in Florida, we got really good at giving out ice and water after a disaster. And then we stepped back and said, we could spend the same amount of money helping these stores get generators so that they can reopen. So we're building our economy and we're helping them have jobs and we're helping our people go get things more than it would be to just give out ice and water. So in Florida, we're really trying to prevent the problem from happening instead of solving it on the backside. So those generators for stores and gas stations here in the state of Florida. But we don't know how long things are going to be closed. So we got really lucky during Hurricane Irma. Things kind of reopened very quickly after the disaster because it really wasn't a major disaster here. But if this were a Hurricane Harvey in Houston scenario, or if it were Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, those stores could be closed for a long time. But make sure when you consider the supplies that you need to have on hand, keep in mind that you're not going to be able to just run out after the storm and go get it. So the picture on the left is the National Guard giving out MREs. How many people have eaten MREs? Yum. And the people on the right are walking down a store aisle, and it looks like it was a bottled water aisle, and you can tell there is no water there. So you don't want to have to eat MREs, and you don't want to be this person that is now immortalized on the news, being the last person to get a bottle of water. To just go get those things in advance, all of the food and water that you're going to need. So this became a very big issue with electricity after a hurricane. And the most complaints that my office got was, how dare we not go get their power back on? So this is a hurricane. And of course, with a high wind event, it's going to knock over all of our beautiful trees and knock out our power. It is extremely inconvenient, and it's hot, and I understand. But electricity is kind of one of those things. We lived for thousands of years without electricity. We're going to make it. It's not going to be comfortable. And yes, it takes a long time. Keep in mind with a storm this size, say for example, if we had Harvey here, some people might still not have electricity because unless your home is safe, they can't restore power to it. So unless a neighborhood or community is safe, that power's not coming back on. With a storm that impacted almost the entire state of Florida, we're looking at trying to restore an entire state. So 20 million people all want their electricity back on right now. It just takes time, and it just requires a lot of patience. So everyone thinks that, the picture on the left is all of those linemen and crews lining up. And yes, we did get that. In Manatee County, we had people staged at the fairgrounds from every electric utility from here to the Mississippi. If they were not in Texas, they were here trying to get our electricity back on. But the reality is that picture on the right, where this truck is wheels deep in some kind of floodwater while also trying to put the electricity back on for you guys, there are dangers involved. And those dangers have to be removed before we can get your electricity back on. And when the entire state looked like this, it just takes a lot of time. Water and sewer. New Orleans is one of my favorite places, and I listen to what they do for emergency management out of necessity so that I can bring good ideas here on what to do out of more fun than that we have to. And people give New Orleans a really hard time for being under sea level. And how dare people think, oh, you live in a bathtub, blah, blah, blah. So in the state of Florida, we're kind of like at sea level. So it's not like we're way high on the mountain talking lowly about these people that live below sea level. They invest millions of dollars in pumps. They have full-time staff, they have backup generators, and they are there 24/7 to make sure those pumps are working. In the state of Florida, in Manatee County alone, we have 650 some odd pumps, and you would be really shocked to see how many of those don't have backup power. So when those pumps go down in New Orleans, of course, they flood, and when the pumps go down in Manatee County, nobody's still eating, right? So nobody likes to talk about poop because it's not fun. But when our lift stations go down in Manatee County, because we're flat and there's nowhere for it to go, that sewage will start backing up into your house. And it's actually a lot more common than you think. So electricity can go out on a normal day. These pumps can go out on a normal day. Poop can back up in your house on a normal day. In a disaster, it just means that there's more poop in more houses, and it's very, very unfortunate, and it's super gross. I'm glad y'all are laughing and not gagging, because it's just something that nobody wanted to talk about, so nobody told you guys, don't flush your toilets or do laundry or wash your dishes in the dishwasher, because that means that those pumps have to handle more water, and if they're already kind of behind, it's just going to make all of that flooding back up so much worse. It was always kind of one of those things that I thought people knew, but nobody ever told y'all. So don't do that. The expectation was, oh, this guy's out watering his grass. And the picture on the right, they're actually hosing off sewage off of something. So even though you have electricity, your home wasn't damaged, everything turned out great, if that lift station, if that pump is without electricity, there is still a risk of that sewage backing up. So be very cautious if your utility calls you and says, please don't do laundry right now, or, please try to limit how often you flush your toilet. This is why. The other phone calls I got were about the amount of debris. Debris can be pretty much anything that the hurricane blew over. It could be trash that was already there. It could be, usually it's a lot of awnings and patios and pool cages. It's a lot of vegetative debris or trees and limbs. And of course, because it's a high wind event, all of that stuff kind of just gets piled up. And everybody wanted their debris picked up immediately. And again, just like the electricity taking a lot of time and requiring patience, debris was that other option. It was kind of like, okay, you guys, yes, I know, and I know it's in the way, and I know it's ugly, and it's killing your grass. But because we had been so long without a wind event, we had a lot of overgrowth. So just, trees grew for 10 years. Nobody cut the trees back because the trees are pretty, and you don't want to cut them down, I understand. But all of that kind of loose vegetative debris ended up in big piles. So the expectation was, we have a couple of piles of debris on the left. And the reality of what debris looks like in a hurricane is that picture on the right. It's entire contents of houses spilled out onto the curb. And in Houston and Texas, they're still working on debris. There are parts of Florida still working on picking up their debris. And yes, we understand it's unsightly, and sometimes you can't see around if it's at the corner of a stop sign or something. And yes, sometimes there are dangerous situations with debris. But when we have to pick up all 740 square miles of debris, it does take a little bit of time. The other part is a little bit of local response. I'm going to breeze through some of this because I think if you guys all went through Irma, you're kind of familiar with the rodeo and with Tropical Storm Alberto. It's just what we have to do locally to prepare everybody. The biggest thing that I saw is people thought that emergency management, meaning me and my very small staff, were going to come out and put their tarps on their roofs, or we're going to come out and give them sandbags, or we're going to come out and help them. And it doesn't really work that way. In emergency management, we support systems and organizations, entire government, so all 375,000 people, but not one person individually. We don't have access to services that don't exist before the storm. So there's not some secret cache of government people that will come help you that don't already live here or aren't already doing their jobs. We just try to open up that door to encourage our nonprofits, our friends and neighbors from outside of the county to come in. What we saw from Hurricane Harvey and Irma last year was everybody was already busy. There are very few nonprofits that have a lot of staff to spare. And when we're already dealing with a catastrophic disaster in Texas, a lot of folks were already there. And they hadn't reached a point where they could just say, okay, these people are okay, we're going to go help Florida now. So in Florida, here in Manatee County, we got very lucky because we didn't have as much damage. But the people down in the Keys, or either in Jacksonville, where they weren't at all near landfall, but they got that freshwater flooding from the other side. There's people 300 miles apart, and we all needed help. And that just required a lot of time. The expectation was on the left. This is a picture of the American Red Cross handing out a bottle of water. And then the picture on the right is probably the first person that you'll see to help you is the person that's coming to rescue you out of your house. They don't have a bottle of water with them. At that point, it's going for life safety. So it's very much like EMS, and EMS will come take you to the hospital, but they're not there to provide your primary care. A lot of what emergency management does is like that. We're here, we can come help you save your life. But as far as like rebuilding your house or buying you new dishes because they were all destroyed, those are things that kind of get left out. And we haven't done a really good job about telling people that in advance. Very, very quickly, just the political shenanigans that we have to go through in order to ask the state for help, in order for the state to ask the feds for help. The expectation was this person in a nice little FEMA jacket coming in and offering assistance, and then the reality is on the left, and if you can't see that, it says, still waiting for FEMA, and it's a skeleton. It's unfortunate, distasteful sense of humor. I think that actually was a picture from New Orleans, but again, that federal intervention, that federal financial support is absolute bare minimum life safety. So they'll help you put a tarp on your roof to prevent further damage, or they'll help you pay for a night in a hotel room, but there's really not a whole lot of systems that can step in, government systems that can step in and do things like, oh, well, we'll actually help you rebuild. No, not really. So this year, I kind of threw this slide in here because it's been going on a lot in the news on what I feel that people in Florida kind of need to accept the terms and conditions about living in Florida. And you have probably all been bombarded with emails lately in the past week to say, okay, here's what you agreed to when you signed up for my email 7 years ago. These are the things that, we need people to understand. Florida is beautiful, and it doesn't have to always be dangerous if you do all of those things in advance to prepare. So the only things that I have left, and I'm going to ask Steve to come up very quickly, they are doing a tax holiday this year. It's June 1st through the 7th to go out and get those supplies now. We've already had one tropical storm. Please don't be in line when all the supplies run out for next time. Learn what hurricane evacuation level you are, and that's that big colorful map when you open up that brochure. And then most importantly, know if your home can withstand a hurricane, if it's built to code, it's not a mobile home, it's outside of the area being evacuated. And if so, please make sure that you ask your family and friends to come stay with you instead of them having to go to a shelter.
I'm going to make this real quick because we're running short on time. Just touch base on a couple of things she said. Remind y'all, not only do you need to make your own kit, you need to make a kit for your pets and your kids or grandkids. But because think about taking your pets to a shelter or your kids or grandkids to a shelter and they have nothing to do. You would just want to commit suicide. Danny, raise your hand. Back in the back. Okay, see Danny back there? You want to become his best friend. He lives on high and dry ground out there. So, all right, remember that. There is online on our website special needs of transportation and medically needed. We beg you to sign up early. Throughout the state of Florida during Irma, 4 times the amount of people that were signed up ended up showing up. So if you can imagine planning a party for 20 people and in 4 hours 100 people show up, that's not a good thing. So please plan on coming early or signing up early. You can get to it by our website. We can provide you transportation and special needs for needy people. Something to remind you of is, see the podium or the platform I'm standing on? See how big this is? If the shelter gets busy, there's going to be about 3 people in this amount of space. And it may not be somebody that you like or that has taken a bath. About 3 people will occupy this space. Something else y'all need to know is at winds, sustained winds of about 45 miles an hour or more, fire trucks and ambulances quit rolling. At about 55 miles an hour or more, police cars stop rolling. That meant there was almost 12 hours during Hurricane Irma that no fire or police were responding here in Manatee County. So that's something to think about. What we try to say is, as Sherilyn was talking about, is the staffing. We've come up with dubbing the term neighbors helping neighbors. That's what it's all about. You have to help your neighbors. So go out and volunteer. There's many things you can volunteer doing. There are CERT groups, community emergency response teams, medical reserve corps. The club itself could set up feeding. If you belong to a church or a social club that has a building, you could be what's called a blue sky shelter. Storm's over with, or storm didn't have here, we need to put people up there. So think about volunteering. So with that, I'm going to cut it short and ask the boss to come back up here to answer any questions that y'all might have.
Yeah, so that we used to call that reverse laning or contraflow. They quit doing it because it is extremely dangerous. If you guys see how many people go the wrong way down an exit and have a head-on collision with a fatality, think of that with a million more people. We have to have staff close off every single other access to that road. It puts those staff in danger. Then we can't use that for heading south for any reason. And some of the pictures I had in a couple of other presentations show all of the help that needs to come this way now can't get to us. So it doesn't increase the outflow enough to negate the danger we increase on ourselves. So.
Brian.
Yeah, we use what we call a policy group decision for that. So I make the recommendation based on the hazard, and our county leadership helps with that decision based on all of the other things. So how many people are we impacting? What else are we going to change because we're making that decision? We want to make sure that everyone can evacuate before tropical storm force winds arrive. With a very big storm, those winds are going to arrive well before landfall, and so we kind of have to keep backing up that timeline. So if landfall is in 12 hours, but our tropical storm force winds are going to get here 14 hours, and it takes 17 hours to evacuate, now we're pushing days away. So we contact all of our local elected officials, our public safety director, the school board, Department of Health, the sheriff, and coordinate when we think that's going to be. So I did catch a lot of flack last year because the schools closed and nobody told a lot of the major employers that they were going to do it in advance. I can't make those employers make decisions. I can make recommendations and they can make that decision. By all means, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. So some employers, say in a low-lying area that has 5,000 employees, might need to close to get those employees out to safety faster than, say, an inland business somewhere, maybe in Lakewood Ranch, that's not in that hurricane evacuation level. So unfortunately, it's so dependent on what that business does, how many employees they have, what kind of demographic they're serving. So we want people to stay open as long as possible. Just when they need to also take care of their own employees, I can't tell them they have to. I think Hurricane Harvey had a massive change on how we thought people would behave. We do hurricane evacuation behavioral studies by region, and what we saw was not what those research studies said we would ever get. So if the research study said, oh, in that scenario, we'd expect 5,000 people to seek government shelter, and we saw 25,000 people seek government shelter. And I think largely because they had not been through a storm before, and then they saw what was on TV. What was not communicated to them was you can't evacuate out of the way of rain. It comes out of the sky, and unless you just go away from the sky, you can't evacuate out of rain. And that's why Houston chose not to evacuate. Unfortunately, that was a devastating and fatal decision for them. But their building codes, is anybody from Texas in the room? Their building codes are awful. Our building codes in the state of Florida are the top building codes for hurricanes in the nation. And we don't tell people that in advance, that your home is built to withstand, because we've had it here. And we get better after every storm. So I do think people made not the decision that they would have made because of Hurricane Harvey.
All right, let's give Sherilyn and Steve a big round of applause for coming. Sherilyn, I know you have one of our beautiful rulers, but today I'm going to give you a pen and pencil set from our club, and we appreciate it. And Steve, I know you just have about everything, but I'm going to give you a pen as well.
Thank you.
Let's give them another round of applause. I know we're running long, and I know that this is a topic, though I know this is a topic that's very important, because we've already seen Alberto. Who knows what's coming next? We're already at A. B's on the way, so to speak, and I think Sherilyn and Steve did exactly what they're supposed to do in their organization. That's to prepare us, and being prepared is going to save your life or somebody else's life. Again, a couple things. I want to thank Donna and Tom Seguin for that matching contribution that they will make. If you have any questions about that to METV, please get with Donna. Again, thank you to the North River Club for coming today. We really appreciate you being here and all of our guests. With that being said, if you want to get your picture taken with oh yeah, and the parting gifts of mangoes down at the bottom of the stairwell. We are adjourned. Thank you.